Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is September 15, 2024. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Also want to thank Sweeney's Pharmacy in Dublin, who, through our interest in Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, brought us together with our guest today, Zoe Patterson, for part two. Where in the heck you calling in from, Zoe?
From Dublin in Ireland.
How cool is that? Well, first of all, I want to just set out and make a correction from part one.
Mm.
I sounded like I knew I was talking about when you brought up David Foster Wallace and said, well, have you seen the movie? In the movie I was referring to
Uh-huh.
was Inherent Vice written by Thomas Pynchon. So I mentioned, well, it's some movie with Joaquin Phoenix, and you were like, "Oh, I don't know about that." It's like anybody watching in their right mind would go, "Dude, this guy knows nothing." He's so. But the funny thing is that I do think that Pynchon, Gaddis, DeLillo, Burgess, even David Foster Wallace to a point are all Joycean wannabes, or they're very close to what Joyce did, and they're like, well, I can do that and maybe take it farther. So if have you ever read Pynchon?
I haven't, which is a really sad thing because everyone who's read him, who I've talked to, has told me that I'd like him.
Yeah.
So eventually I'll read him, but I haven't
Right,
yet.
but the cool thing is that you got into David Foster Wallace, but
Mhm.
there is a David Foster Wallace movie that I
Yeah.
was curious that you saw, End of the Tour from
Mhm.
2015, which
Yeah.
is not it's based on the interviews the Rolling Stone did with him.
Mhm.
Have you seen that movie?
I have, yes. I actually saw it when it came out because it
What
came out right when I was really getting into David Foster Wallace, so it
and
was
then so
perfect timing.
what was your take on the movie?
It's been a while since I've seen it. I really enjoyed it at the time, I think. It felt like a really nice compliment to like Wallace's actual work, which I had been like reading a lot at the time.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I yeah.
It's interesting because, will there ever be a movie on Infinite Jest or any of Wallace's stuff? And he was so expansive in doing nonfiction and fiction
Mhm.
that I thought it was a good introduction for me to him, and it seemed to capture his essence a little, but who knows,
Yeah.
unless you know him, you know.
Yeah, yeah. No, there's like an interesting kind of similarity between Joyce and Wallace in that both have written works that people describe as you're completely unable to be translated into film. Like I know Ulysses has been translated into film, but it's still one of those books that you kind of can't do on film. And then Finnegan's Wake even more so.
Yeah,
And then Infinite Jest sort of has that same quality. I think maybe some of the short fiction could work in film,
yeah.
not all of it, but some of it. But I don't think Infinite Jest could work as a film, but
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
it'd be interesting if someone tried.
it's no, it's high aspiration, and in fact,
Mhm.
Joseph Strick's film on Ulysses is okay, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of Joyce films,
Mhm.
and Mary Ellen Butte's film of Finnegan's Wake is amazing in a way, but it's
Mhm.
like what you said, and I agree. You can't make The Wake into a film because it already is a film. In a
Yeah.
way, it's just so cinematic, and
Mhm.
just to think that Eisenstein, the great Russian filmmaker, was, you know, possibly gonna collaborate with Joyce to make a film of Ulysses is mind-blowing, and that Joyce ran a movie theater is mind-blowing. So,
Yeah.
anyways, and then the other one, if you haven't seen Crock of Gold, the documentary on Shane MacGowan, amazing documentary on the lead singer of the Pogues,
Mhm.
who at his funeral, they hailed Finnegan's Wake Up like it was the host,
Oh,
you know.
wow.
Oh, it's an amazing shot. And
Mhm.
in that film, Crock of Gold, they incorporate there's about 3 minutes of Joyce walking down the street with his wife on it's either 16 millimeter or 35 millimeter film. And
Mm,
they incorporate it so beautifully into the film. And
mhm.
it humanizes Joyce for people who just treat him, oh, he's a guy who wrote books. We don't really have movies of him. We have photos of him, you know. So
Yeah.
it's sort of cool how they do that. But this leads me to ask just a question that I've probed for 40, 50 years is what was the first human invention? And I'm just going to suss out a couple of these things and then you go into it however you want. That,
Okay.
you know, when I ask students, I go, what's the first human invention? They usually go like fire. Like fire, we didn't invent fire. Fire was already there. We invented how we harness fire. But they
Yeah.
will say tools, they will say language, gesture, um, grunting, you know, sound making. And
Mhm.
that's all good, and then one person said, "Well, the first human invention is the line." So you draw a line, and as George Carlin said, you draw the line if you're a comedian, and then you cross the line.
Mhm.
That sounds very Joycean, but
Yeah.
then, my other friend says that the first human invention might be the other, the concept
Mm.
of another person, like when you see your mother's eyes and she's
Uh-huh.
giving you food, you see your face in her eyeball. And so
Mhm.
it's almost like you see this mirror image. So then you're saying, oh, there's something other than me. Because
Mhm.
previous to that, you don't you don't know there's someone else because you're inside your mother and you're one with your mother. You don't think you're different inside the womb.
Mhm.
So then, Theater of the Oppressed, Augusto Paulo in South America, he said the first human invention is theater, which sort of in captures all of those.
Yeah.
So I'm just sort of your inclination. What would you say is the first human invention? Any hunches or guesses?
I mean, my gut answer is I don't know that because I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Um, but, it's a tough one. I'd say humans themselves, which is weird because we didn't invent ourselves, but also if you think about, like, evolution and that kind of thing, we kind of did,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. So, I would say the first human evolution not human evolution, sorry, human invention is ourselves.
Is ourselves. That's
Yeah.
really good. I have had that answer. People say we've invented the concept of a human being, humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, we invented humanity. And it's funny because McLuhan said that Finnegan's Wake is dreaming awake. It's sort of like how he said all humans have this ability to create scenarios in the middle of the night. And artists actually do that while they're awake. Not to sound elitist, but they dream awake. And so have dreams played a role in your creative process? Because you also wrote fiction, but
Mhm.
now you're mainly writing nonfiction for your theses. I mean,
Yeah.
you're still working on that, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm still working on that, and I still write fiction as well. Just don't spend as much time on it as I do
Right.
my thesis because it's a
But
thesis.
you've been consistently both a nonfiction and fiction writer.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
do dreams play a role in your creative process when you're
Um,
writing?
I would say so, but not in the way of necessarily of, oh, I have a dream and then I pull from, whatever happened in that dream and put it in my writing. It's more, my dreams set the tone for the day, and the tone for the day directs my thoughts and then what I write about, um, if that makes sense, you
That
know?
makes a lot of sense, but is that just consciously thinking, or do you keep a dream journal of any sort or notes?
I don't keep a dream journal. The closest thing I have to a dream journal is just, when I'll text a friend or someone if something really weird happens in a dream. So scattered messages maybe count as a dream journal, but not a regular one.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
Because there's a couple more questions I wanna ask you about dreaming, and
Mhm.
that is, this is Jean Cocteau, and just any, reactions. He said, "It's a filmmaker's privilege to be able to allow a large number of people to dream the same dreaming together." So, like,
Mhm.
you're in a movie theater, you're all dreaming the same dream together if you're watching a movie. To show us, moreover, the optical illusions of unreality with the rigor of realism.
Mm.
I mean, especially that last part, how does that resonate in any sensibility with you or Joyce? The
Mhm.
optical illusions of unreality with the rigor of realism.
Um, yeah, I think it's, I sort of tying that into the earlier part about, the privilege of, having a large amount of people, getting a large amount of people to dream the same dream at once, i.e., watching a film. Um, I think, it speaks to this thing about how our dreams are sort of us not having autonomy over what our brain is doing, and how we interact with our dreams is sort of, it's sort of a response to that experience of not having control over what your brain is doing, and the filmmaker kind of gets to do that to people, sort of becomes the subconscious and gets to, again, direct people's brains towards what they want them to think about rather than what they consciously want to think about. So I think it's an interesting comparison. And yeah, and there's, I think both with film and with dreams, I think, yeah, there's a sort of like uncanniness where it feels very real and very not real at the same time. And that's why things like dreams and films are so important to us, because they like capture this sort of weird state that we don't fully know how to make sense of, oh, this seems so real, but so unreal at the same time. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
That was good because it also recalled, what, Steve Martin evokes. He loves David Mamet's line, "Art can only be made with the unconscious mind." It's like, yeah,
Mhm.
right. How do you make something unconsciously in the art world? I mean, it's sort of like what you might aspire to do, but
Mhm.
how can you make something in this, like, this world where you're not in control? I mean, the
Mhm.
neuroscientists say that 80% of us are operating unconsciously or subconsciously. It's like, I feel both of us are present here 100%, but there is some unconscious or subconscious operating. How could you ever measure it?
Yeah, I think in terms of like, having to create unconsciously, but how do you do that? I think creating art is all about sort of accepting that you're not in control
It's
of the
accepting.
unconscious. You know, I I'm gonna link this to Joyce, but it'll take me a minute to get there.
Yeah.
But just sort of like a topic of debate that I encountered on like social media recently. I forget which platform. Was this topic of the idea of like maladaptive daydreaming or daydreaming too much, where you spend a lot of your time daydreaming, basically. Um, and it's sort of been identified as a problem, and people online, put forth all of these strategies for sort of taking control of your brain throughout the day and minimizing daydreaming and unproductive thoughts. And some people, were saying, oh, like, why, what is there to think about if you're not, if you're trying to cultivate your brain to only to just be empty or to just have thoughts about work and nothing else. um and it like taps into this anxiety we have around, not having control over our thoughts, of letting, the unconscious take over. And then, like I said before, art is letting that unconscious take over and making it work for you and making it, into something meaningful. And I think like that kind of idea ties in really well to Finnegan's Wake, because I think a lot of the anxiety with Finnegan's Wake is that people feel they can't take control over the text like they can with a normal novel. And enjoying Finnegan's Wake and being able to read it is all about just accepting that like you're not going to have control over it ever, and you just sort of have to let it, you just sort of ride the wake with it. you
Yeah.
know yeah, it's just
That's surfing. That's when McLuhan invented that word,
mhm.
surfing the internet. He
Oh
invented that. He says Heiderdig. Anyways, he used that surfing. It's like surfing or going with the flow, the big thing. I mean, what could be more cool than what you're doing with your PhD than to study something that's the opposite in a way. People think
mhm.
this is just like, daydreaming gobbledygook, but indeed you realize, no, I've accepted what Joyce accepted, that we can tap into that. And no, we not even tap into it. We can accept that we are controlled by
Yeah.
that, or maybe not control. The word is, but unproductive thought was great. It's like George Carlin has a great line. Whatever happened to letting kids stare out the window? Yeah. That's because you're like, okay, you got to go to soccer practice now. Okay, now I'm going to take you here. Kids are on regimen now. I mean, I don't know how
Yeah.
you were raised, but we were like, just go outside and play and don't come back till you're done playing.
Yeah, and it's gotten worse since Carlin too, because back then, and even when I was growing up as well, it was soccer practice and all those activities and all that. But now it's just turned into like you just give the child an iPad and
And
they
that's
stare at
it.
the iPad all day, which is worse. At least with soccer, they're socializing and getting exercise. Like yeah, it's just constantly having stimulation in front of, never being alone with their own brain.
Yeah, that
Um,
was that
yeah.
was a great McLuhan observation. He didn't, but someone said that
Mhm.
video games were two kids playing in from, like, when they first started, two kids playing
Mhm.
in front of the TV.
Yeah.
Then when they became multiple players, they well, then when 3 or 4 or 5 kids showed up, only 2 kids could play, so that gave the opportunity for the other kids to go outside and play until it was their turn.
Yeah.
Now it's like, now you can play with people all over the world
Mhm.
live, so how's that changes? So I wanted to say, and I loved your bringing up daydreaming, because I think it is, as Tim Leary taught us, if you learn how to lucid dream, you can direct your path after you die. And this is like so close.
Mhm.
What Joyce is, I'm going to get to that with this quote I just read from a speech specialist at Duke University on a Finnegan's Wake article. It's an amazing
Mhm.
article. What a sleep specialist has to say about the dreaminess of Finnegan's Wake.
Mm.
But before, I think I might ask you this part one, but I have to ask you. The New
Mhm.
Yorker had an article just recently how kids in the womb, we're not sure if they can dream, or can they dream. Do they have to have experience outside the womb to be able to dream? And I'm
Mm.
just your hunch. What do you think? Are people dreaming inside the womb, or do they have to come outside the womb, be given birth, and then with experience they can dream?
I that is a really tough question. I mean, I have no clue. Like, but I would say they probably can't. I mean, I haven't read the article, but I my guess would be they couldn't dream in the womb
They
because
could not. Yeah.
yeah, because from everything both from my own personal experience and just from, life and talking to other people about dreams, it kind of seems like you need to have, like a library of experiences for your brain to form dreams.
That's
Um,
amazing.
so,
Library of experience. That's really good, because, in other words, how could we ever know? Because when you come out of the womb, you're not speaking language for
mhm.
many years, and then you go, when I was inside the womb, I used to dream about this hillside of flowers. How could you even have the words when you're doing it? So
Yeah.
that's the other thing about dreaming is the importance of words explaining. I always said growing up, I never took a dream journal or anything. I loved Salvador Dali and the whole idea of dreaming and all that psychedelic.
Mhm.
But how can you I always said, "Why do you wanna explain your dream? Because dreams are meant to be dreamt, not to be explained or talked about, because
Mhm.
you'll never be able to put into words what happens. You might approximate it, but how could you you can't."
Yeah.
So so here's this, Jade Wood, a speech specialist at Duke. Sleeping is actually a very, very active state of the brain. And there's a lot of life affirming things happening. For example, the growth hormones are being released. Your brain is literally refreshing itself when you sleep. So, in a way, you're not so much dying as getting maybe a little younger in a way,
Hmm.
or getting a little healthier. She says sleep is almost like a tiny bit of reversal of death.
Hmm.
So what do you think about this? That you're getting younger and you're getting healthier, and it's not really you're dying. So go ahead. Yeah, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I at first it's I think it's interesting because like, logically it makes sense, because I'm sure as everyone knows, a day after 8 hours of sleep is much different than the day after 4 hours of sleep. So like, I believe it. Um, but also too, a really common metaphor for sleep is death, like a temporary death.
Yeah,
And it's almost sort of like you're borrowing time. Well, you're not borrowing time, but you're sort of eating into the span of time that you will be dead in the future. You're chipping away at some of it, um, and getting some of it out of the way now while you sleep, so that you can live longer and sort of stave off that deadline of
yeah.
actually dying. Um, so
Which
I
is
think,
all so connected to the wake, because
yeah.
it's like, what is the wake about? Living or dying, you know? Because this guy, I mean, actually, I freaked out when Burroughs when Burgess does that 30-minute talk in the bar. Have you seen that on YouTube? It's unbelievable.
I haven't
An
actually.
Oh, Anthony Burgess
Mhm.
explaining the wake for 30 minutes in a bar, and he says that the 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 guy fixing the roof in the song Finnegan's Wake
Mhm.
doesn't die. He falls off the roof and they have a funeral for him. They think he's dead.
Mhm.
I've always said no, he's dead. But Burgess says no, he's not dead. They think he's dead, so they put him in a coffin. Then the whiskey bottle flies across the room, drips whiskey in his mouth, and that wakes him up from the dead. But he's sort of like, well, maybe he's just in this coma state, and they wake him up out of the coma. I mean, it's mind blowing. I
Yeah.
can't, you know. So many directions we can go, but the I want to stay on Joyce for a few more minutes here. One
Mhm.
is Richard Ellman
Yeah.
said, "We're learning to be Joyce's contemporaries." So I'm curious your thoughts on that in regards to, like, Frank Zappa and James Joyce said, all times are happening now, all at
Mhm.
once. And then this whole element of time. What is time? We could do hours on that because you know, if you study Dante's effect on Joyce, he says the ear is time and the eye is space.
Mhm.
So any thoughts on this idea, uh um we're learning to be Joyce's contemporaries? Does he mean does Elman mean we're learning how Joyce lived in his time, or that all times are happening now? Or does it mold into that too?
I think it's kind of the latter, but not quite. It's more so that we're learning how Joyce's work fits into our own time. Um, and like, I think this is something you could technically say about any work of art, but I think Joyce brings it to another level of, when we interact with art, we, if it's not already like of our time, if it didn't just come out last week, we tend to just say, oh, it's from this year, and so we have to be in that mindset when we read it. It's you listen, Finnegan's Wake is a text from the 30s, so we've got to read it and keep that in mind. And like, yes, but also Finnegan's Wake is a text of now because you're reading it now. And art isn't a standalone thing. It's a conversation between the artist and the audience. And the audience does have a say. The audience isn't just being spoken at, the audience is also speaking back. So what we bring to Finnegan's Wake or to any work of art is how, that's how we make it contemporary. That's how we learn to be Joyce's contemporaries, by, learning how we would interact with Joyce in our own context. Like when we read The Wake and we find something that feels like it's a reference to something from now, like I think last week in Sweeney's, someone was saying, they saw like a reference to email in The Wake. There are many things like that in The Wake where like we see things that Joyce wouldn't have known about what we know about. That's us, putting that work in our own context and thus making Joyce our contemporaries and vice versa. So I think it's all about, how like any work of art, Joycean or not, like we're involved in its production through our engagement with it.
That's really good, because the term you used in part one was active reader.
Yeah.
And it seems though that, I mean, maybe David Foster Wallace and Joyce are excelling at that, when no, anybody can read anything, whether it's considered a romance novel or just, pulp fiction kind of stuff, the newspaper or the magazines. So yeah, that's what McLuhan calls it. The user is the content. But it is funny because, was Joyce just predicting the future by putting email and in there, or if that's just a coincidence, and some of these really hardcore Joyceans don't want to say he was being predictive. That's just coincidence. But I like how you handled that, Zoe. That was good, because now a couple other Joyce phrases I'd love to just get your feelings on is, this is from Portrait. I will try to express myself in some mode of life or art as freely as I can and as wholly as I can, using for my defense the only arms I allow myself to use: silence, exile, and cunning. Now, most people don't realize that's where McLuhan got one of his aspirations to say everything we invent extends some humanness. Before, what does the writing utensil extend for you? Like knife and fork extends your teeth, shutter in a camera extends your eyelid. What does the writing utensil, whether it's the pen or the keyboard, what humanness does it extend for you?
I mean, I would say this feels like the easy answer, but I would say it extends the brain, also extends the voice. Because like something people talk about with, literature and with writing is, the limits of language. And it's the limits of language and like what we can express with what we have are often, tied to the written word. People, say, oh, the written word is limited because, it's hard to, convey certain tone, that kind of stuff. But the spoken word is also limited, and the written word has its own strengths that can express what the spoken word can't. So it is kind of a two sides of the same coin thing. When something can't be spoken, it can be written, and then vice versa.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's like, wait, saying is hearing. How could you see what you're saying? That's sense ratio shifting. But I love you said it's the easy answer. Hey, I'm after easy, Zoe. I'm a student. I'm trying to learn here. But I love that, because when people say, I say, what does the movie, or cinema extend? They'll go the eye or memory. And of course,
Mm.
movies extend your foot because you're traveling. And I mean, that's also what printed word, the pen's
Yeah.
doing is extend. And really, it's extending your finger because you can't carry around a sandbox and write your theses in a sandbox, with
Mhm.
with your finger writing in the sand, or the so then those three words: silence, exile, and cunning. Any thoughts on those three words?
Oh, do I have thoughts on those three words? I think they're interesting because they're coming from, the Stephen Dedalus of Portrait, who's still very young and very sort of like, firm in his like artistic sense and that kind of stuff. And, especially you see like in Ulysses too, you can, you can tell that he's young and has not figured a lot of things out yet. But the silence, exile, and cunning, it feels like all three are sort of a grasp for a sense of control.
Yeah,
Kind of going back to like creating art and sort of giving over control, but to the unconscious, that kind of thing. I think those three things, like are all ways of sort of trying to maintain control. And I think maybe that's like a possibly a key into like the artistic and intellectual flaws of Stephen Dedalus. The need for control is part of what's holding him back.
yeah,
And it's this weird thing, as with exile in particular. I think like silence and cunning are, I think, for me, very just about that control. Exile is a weird thing because it's also about control, but it's also about it's also about letting go of control. Because exile is a thing where you're taking control of your life in terms of choosing where you are, but at the same time, as Joyce did, but at the same time you're putting yourself at the mercy of something else. um, you're choosing to change what has control over you, if that makes sense.
yeah. It
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. In fact, it evokes this great movie I've shown, Problema, where they sit 20 modern thinkers down and ask them philosophical questions like this. And one of them is, should you be able to choose where you live? Now, most
Mm,
people go, yeah, of course. Like, you moved from America to Dublin. You
yeah.
chose. I moved from Michigan to California. But in the long run, I think I kind of want to think it's the opposite. It could be. Most people should live where they're born. You just shouldn't
Mm,
move. But it's like, what do you mean? I live in a bad situation. I'm going to move. It's one of the hugest issues in the world today. But then,
mm,
are you abandoning your tribe in a way? And when I go back to Flint, Michigan, my hometown, it's horrible poverty, and every
mm,
10th house is standing, all the others are down. It's like, what did I do? I abandoned my hometown. So it's a funny thing what you said about letting go of control, you
mhm.
know, in exile, and that's, exile. So here's another line from Portrait. Welcome, O life, I go to encounter for the millionth time the reality of experience and to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscience of my race. I'm more so curious your thoughts. What is smithy of my soul and then uncreated conscience of my race? What do you get out of those words?
Well, in terms of smithy of my soul, I mean, I guess on a more surface level, I've always seen it as just sort of a kind of direct kind of reference to Stephen Daedalus's name, being named after Daedalus, um, you know, who in Greek mythology, was someone who made things such as, the labyrinth and the wings and all that.
Yeah.
Um, so, I've always like read
Yeah.
it as a reference to that.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also, again, I think it's like another sorry to kind of harp on this, but I think it's another sort of idea about control. The idea that your own soul is basically a workshop, where you can, be in charge, be in control, like make whatever you want to make. And then, that like that also sort of ties into, the Daedalus myth too, because if you look to like the Daedalus and Icarus story with the wings, it was an invention that, yes, like Daedalus had, control over making, but then it was out of his control when Icarus, used it in the way that he did.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's like this sort of like, this false sense of control over oneself.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That was good because I love when you said, sorry to harp on this, but one of my favorite answers in your part one was, I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank. And you said, rant on it for 30 minutes. And I'm like, dude, that is so me. I have to rant on something for 30 minutes. But the
Yeah.
word rant, I was talking about this with my friend. I says, rant kind of carries negativeness, negative connotation. And so, because I call all my Zappa lectures rants, but
Mhm.
I don't deem it to be negative. I just say, you're working things out. You're sussing them out. But then I went to the etymology on the word rant,
Mhm.
and it's to be jovial, to frolic, spring about. I mean, that's really, but then it says boisterous, talk foolishly, rave. So it's funny when you read etymology, which
Mhm.
words you pull out, because I'm going to pull out jovial and frolic and spring about.
Yeah, it's so interesting with the word rant, because I also, I also have kind of always been like, why is this such a negative thing? And I think it kind of ties into what I was talking before about like, viewing excessive daydreaming as a problem, as a
Yeah,
maladaptive thing, because it's not, like productive thought, or it's not like a state of calm where you can just be
yeah,
productive. Um, because, like daydreaming, ranting is also something that takes time.
yeah,
um and I think in, our current society, I say current, but like, this is something that can be applied to, many periods in history. We're all put under a lot of pressure to, make being productive and, serving capitalism and all that as, our main focus. And things like daydreaming, things like ranting take time away from that. And then ranting, it's sort of a double thing too, where it's not only taking your time from being, productive, but it's also taking someone else's time because you're ranting at someone. And I've often found I've done this, and people have done this to me too, where either I've ranted to someone or someone has ranted to me and then said, sorry for ranting about
right,
that. Because you just, you know that you just took someone's time,
right.
to dwell on thought rather than to dwell on, how can I be productive and useful and all that. Um, so
It's that when I ask people, where'd you get your work ethic from? And they always go, their parents. And it's like, oh, you look at work ethic in Wikipedia, and about the third paragraph down, it said this could be a scam from consumer culture. It's like, why do we have to be, quote, so productive? I mean, isn't the point? Actually, I was going to bring that up and I buried it in my notes. Here's the line. Pascal, Blaise Pascal, the mathematician philosopher, he says, all the world's problems could be solved if you could sit in a room quietly in silence,
yeah.
and not be productive. I mean, not all of them, but he's just saying that is an important part.
Mhm.
Daydreaming is an important part of our lives. Ranting is an important part, but these sort of get marginalized and, oh, that you're not being productive. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah,
it,
like, like we were saying before, no one just gets to look out the window anymore.
yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I like to reword aphorisms, and I reworded it. whatever happened to letting kids stare at their cell phone? Because eventually kids will stare at their cell phone like it is a window. Nothing could be on, the power could be off. They're just using that framing device to stare at something, to stare at a portal.
Yeah.
Okay, here's one that I'm just adding. You're the first one to ask about this one.
Ooh.
I love the line because it's repeated all the time. And you know Ulysses way better than I. The ineluctable modality of the visible, at least that if no more, thought through my eyes. I mean, have you thought about that line? Because it's sort of an important line in Ulysses, isn't it?
It is an important line. It's the opening. I mean, I'm sure you know this, but it's the opening line of Proteus.
Yeah.
And I've always thought about it in the context of, the larger like episode of Proteus, because it's a line, sort of about like reflecting on the senses, and then Proteus is, a episode that goes like deep into Stephen's brain, and it's for first time readers, they have a hard time figuring out what's going on in that episode. And that's the first time in Ulysses where you do have a hard time figuring out what's going on, because the first two episodes, Telemachus and Nestor, like, linguistically there are some difficulties, but like, for the most part, you can follow the narrative and it's fairly straightforward in that way. Right. But then Proteus is the first episode where readers give up and put the book down and never open it again, because they're like, what's going on? Is this real? Is this not real? And yeah, it's, I think it's like a warning to the reader of
is like, it really? Wow.
Well, not a warning. Warning is too negative. I would say it's sort of a overture of what the rest of the episode is going to be like.
Yeah.
It's a signal to the reader that, like, yeah, we had a story going for the first two episodes, and now you need to, pay attention to something else. You need to pay attention to the senses and to the mind and how it works. Yeah. And that's how it's going to be for the vast majority of the book. Yeah.
It's like hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Watch what's going to happen. Here's I'm dropping a little hint, but I love that you say warning and then you soften it with the overture, because it is both. I mean, the thing is, how do we know his motive? That's all we do, is have tons of books telling us what we think his motive is, and then that shapes us, Yeah, and
it's like we can guess at his motive. Like, I think with what I just said, I'm guessing at his motive, but ultimately we can't know. Yeah. And so we just sort of have to decide for ourselves what the motive is, and that's where we come in as like the active reader, active audience. The reader makes a decision about what Joyce is doing, and then interacts with that interacts with the book based on that decision. But yeah, and and Proteus is an episode that's near and dear to my heart too, mostly less because of the actual episode, but more because of the reception of it. Because it is that like first episode where people give up. I'm always so adamant about telling anyone who's reading Ulysses for the first time that you will not understand any of it, and that's okay. Just keep going, just barrel through. It's fine. You'll probably understand more of the next episode, so don't worry about it. Because that's really like the first sort of test of like, are you able to be comfortable with not understanding everything? It's actually I spoke about this a bit at the Joyce symposium this summer, actually. But there, as I'm sure there are a lot of like books that are sort of like a reader's guide to Ulysses or to Finnegan's Wake. And there was one that I've read quite a lot of them for my research, and there's one that like it tells its readers to like skip a few of the more difficult parts of Ulysses if they're having too much trouble. And one of them is Proteus. And the writer basically says like, oh, reading Proteus is not essential for, appreciating Ulysses or understanding Ulysses. And I can't agree with that. I think it's absolutely essential
Yeah,
to, have that moment of like, okay, this is going to confuse me and I just need to live with it.
yeah,
And I think if you skip that, you're missing out on that sort of moment of like, okay, I need to get with what this book is doing to continue
yeah.
reading.
It's
Um,
really, really a great attitude, Zoe, because that's like our line in funk music is you're knee deep in the swamp muck. You can't just like get saved and rescued out of it. You have to persevere through it to get to really the experience. And I mean
yeah.
that's what the wake is. You don't get the wake if you get caught up in too much on understanding, but
Hmm.
eventually you will get the rewards will come if you persevere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, here's Schiller on poetry because I'm curious if this kind of relates what we're saying. And you
Hmm.
said, and he talks about modes. You talked about modality. He says poetry has two modes. One, the naive mode is ancient and assumes language is a window into reality.
Hmm.
Two, the sentimental mode belongs to our artificial age and sees language as a mirror to our inner turmoil. So if you want me to repeat them, I can, but it's just sort of dividing. He's saying poetry is in naive mode or the sentimental mode. Any
Hmm.
thoughts on that?
I think it's interesting that he distinguishes so clearly between reality and our inner turmoil, because I think they coexist, like they inform one another. Like our the only way we know reality is how we perceive reality, and that's dictated by our inner turmoil. And then, you know, in the reverse, like our reality helps to sow our inner turmoil.
Yeah.
So you kind of can't separate them.
Yeah.
So I find it interesting that he separates them.
Well, let's go on that. The next question
Mhm.
could be then, is perception reality?
Maybe. And I
Very.
think there's no way of knowing whether it is or not. I
Yeah.
think that's one of our, something we just have to live with as human beings, is that like we'll
Yeah.
never really know. And
Yep.
that's kind of how Joyce is. So I think that's how he taps into what it means to be human, is that you'll never really know. Um,
Yeah. That's good. My one friend, I says, is perception reality? He goes, that's all you got. And it isn't, because we do have, and I loved how you approached the Schiller. Okay, and this is a continuation of the theme. T.S. Eliot said poetry's outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
oh, I would say, and I mean, I obviously I can't speak for everyone, but I think of my inner dialogue as being in a language that is exclusive to myself.
Yeah.
And I have to imagine it's the same for other people, because,
Yeah.
like yeah, and it's not a, oh, my brain works differently than everyone else, because I don't think that, but it's more
Yeah.
just like I am the only one who, has this specific perception, and the same goes for everyone else. So I think the language that we all have, our inner monologue, I forget the phrase you used, and is,
Inner dialogue. Yeah.
inner dialogue is,
Yeah.
I guess the base of it would have to be whatever, one's first language, mother tongue is, but then, turned into a dialect of the self.
It's
Um,
amazing how you approached it, Zoe, because when I say, what language is your inner dialogue in? They go, English. I go, well, really, I'm talking a little more metaphorically. Eh, what
mhm,
what form is your inner consciousness in? Then I have to reword it. If they say English,
yeah.
I have to reword it. But no one I've ever asked this in 40 years has put the context into everyone's. You took it from, I'm asking your inner dialogue, and that's amazing because Abigail Child is an amazing experimental filmmaker in New York.
Mhm.
would love her. She did this documentary on Emma Goldman, and she's really a brilliant artist. I says, "What language is your inner dialogue in?" She goes, "I wish I knew." That's sort of like it's an exclusive to herself, and
Yeah.
it is amazing because there is no inner dialogue. That's the whole thing, that poetry is so different.
Mhm.
Like it's actually back to Gary Snyder saying the role of the poet is to see the world without language, then put that seeing into language.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what Joyce is doing. It's language about language.
Mhm.
So that's why we go, well, this is not reading like a book's supposed to read. It's like, well, get over it. He's teaching you what a book reading does to you, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love that answer of "I wish I knew," because, like, when I
I
say
know, isn't that amazing?
yeah, because when I say it's like my own personal dialect with, with the base of English, because that's what I speak, I I'm saying that generally because I don't know how to describe that dialect.
That's
It just exists, and I don't know how to make heads or
yeah,
tails of it. And I also, don't have full confidence that everyone else is,
yeah,
inner dialogue is like that. That's just my
yeah.
guess from my own inner dialogue.
Well,
Um,
I get this, it's in TV commercials or it's in my mother complaining, or I get all kinds of creative answers,
mhm.
but it is interesting because can anyone ever tell me what their inner dialogue really is? It's like trying to describe a dream. It's the same thing. You can't
Yeah.
put it into words, but you can approximate it into words.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because like I'm thinking about before how we were talking about, what is the writing utensil an extension of, and is it
Yeah.
an extension of the brain, that kind of thing. Um, and thinking about like my inner dialogue and language, I think both with spoken and with written language, but in different ways. Um, both, I'd say more with written language, but also with spoken language. The language that comes out that I produce when I revisit it, which happens more with written language, just because, there's always this disconnect where it doesn't feel quite like it came from me. Like I know it did, but it feels like a different consciousness than like the one that's in here. And I don't know if other people have that experience, but I think it's again being able to not fully able to communicate what my inner dialogue is. It doesn't even, it's different than what comes out.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
T.S. Eliot saying, when I talk to you, I've got to use words. Well, no, you
Mhm.
don't. Basically, you do. You
Yeah.
know, you can't go like, no, that's Andy Warhol did it best. He's being interviewed once and they go, well, why did you paint this painting? He goes, can I just go, 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 go? And she goes, yeah. I says, dude, he was talking Finnegan's Wake there. He was just going, go, 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 go.
Yeah.
And that's why he was the greatest Duchamp clone ever, or one of them, because he was realizing that painting, you don't put painting into words, but
Yeah.
you've got to, because you're going to sell the painting and say that blah blah blah. Okay, so here's the one that I'm really thankful for you to turning me on to, Juna Barnes. How
Mhm.
did I not know about this woman? I was so
No.
it was so cool. Okay, now here's a quote I'm going to read to you by Joyce and her, and I would love you to fill me in.
Okay.
Barnes revels, revels. What's that verb mean? Revels, like
Revels, it's sort of, how to describe it. It's like kind of immersing yourself in the enjoyment of something.
yeah,
Like,
that's what I
yeah,
thought.
yeah,
Immersing enjoyment. Revels in Joyce's most beautiful sentences. And she put on or she had something to do with Exiles, a production of Exiles.
mhm,
And then they give this sentence by Joyce that one of the sentences she rebelled in.
yeah.
So stood they both a while in Wan. What's WAN? Is that how you pronounce it? Wan?
One, yeah, that's a word I know and that I don't know how to articulate the meaning
Yeah.
of, but
Okay.
it's
But
yeah.
here's the sentence by Joyce. So stood they both a while and wan, hope sorrowing one with the other. So what does that mean? So stood they both, they stood together,
Yeah.
hoping that sorrow one with the other. Hope sorrowing with one with the other. Hope. So is hope the noun and sorrowing is the verb? Hope sorrowing one with the other.
Wait, is it souring or sorrowing? Ah,
Sorrowing.
okay.
Yeah.
Pale and exhausted, Jerry. Juan.
Juan. Oh, Susan
Oh,
says Juan is pale and exhausted. So stood they both a while in Juan, hope sorrowing one with the other. What does that mean?
um, I mean, well, they're standing with each other. But also
Yeah.
I think I think like the hope sorrowing is sort of, a way of communicating the loss of hope. But rather
Right.
than hope going away, it's hope like is there, but creating the opposite condition of hope. Um, which is an interesting way of framing it because normally when we talk about not having hope, it's the absence rather than hope is here, but hope is not doing hope's job. Um,
That is good. Hope is here, but it's not doing its job. So it unites the two people. They're like united because they're both realizing this.
yeah.
So here's Juna Barnes. I realize Joyce must indeed have begun life as a singer and a very tender singer. And because no voice can hold out over the brutalities of life without breaking, he turned to the quill and paper,
Oh,
for so he could arrange in the necessary silence the abundant inadequacies of life as a laying out of jewels, jewels with a will to decay.
whoa.
Mm,
I mean,
Wow.
is that brilliant writing or what?
yeah.
It's really poetic, but what is she saying in your opinion there? Because I mean, it
Well,
is very poetic, but I'm just curious your thought.
so, she's referencing, him as a musician, which, tracks A because, he was a singer, and B because the particular line that she's talking about is a very like rhythmic sort of flowy line. So it's, it's one of it's a great example of, the musicality of Joyce, which we talk about a lot.
Right,
That's why people read Joyce aloud,
right.
because of the musicality of it. And I think she mentioned silence there, and I think that's a really good tie-in to the mention of silence in Portrait, because
Right.
it's once again, like if Joyce were expressing this through the actual spoken word or the sung word rather,
Yeah,
it would be too powerful to like handle emotionally, psychologically.
yeah,
So he's taking on silence as sort of a method of control of
yeah,
being able to express this without completely overwhelming himself.
yeah,
He puts the musicality of it on the page rather than performs it himself. And then we're left with Joycean text where instead of him performing the text, the readers perform the text, through reading it aloud, or even just when they're reading it silently, still, you know, latching onto the musicality of it.
yeah.
So he's transferred that aspect of the music of it to us because it's less overwhelming for us because we're not the ones expressing that. Um,
Like we can hum the book.
yeah, um, yeah, I think
Because
I may be wrong on this.
you know why a bee hums?
Why?
Because it doesn't know the words.
Oh my god. No,
Well, that's sort of it. Go ahead. Yeah.
I may be wrong on this.
Yeah.
So I hope if I'm wrong, someone comments and tells me I'm wrong so
Yeah.
that I know that I'm wrong. But I'm fairly certain. So there, as you know, there are a few recordings of Joyce
Yeah.
reading. And I'm fairly certain the one recording we have of him reading part of Ulysses is a passage that was like someone else's speech that he put in the book.
Oh,
Um,
really?
I may be wrong on this, but this is,
No.
if I remember correctly. So it's like when he's, when he's bringing his own voice to his work, he opts for something that he like pulled from elsewhere rather than,
Wow.
like
I
the
know
musicality of
all
Proteus or whatever.
Dude, I know all the smarty pants Joyce guys who will nail that in a second. So that's good that you put it out and we can say, okay, what is it? Because it sounds like something Joyce would do.
Yeah, I may
Yeah.
be misremembering. I may be
Yeah.
misremembering. So if I am, apologies for that. But
No,
I
don't be apologizing because what it is spawning us to go learn. That's
yeah,
what learning is, keeping it going, not like, okay, I know that, and then
yeah.
categorizing it away, putting it away. But this is amazing because the other quote I got recently that I love is art alone makes life possible. That's
Mm.
Joseph Beuys. If you don't know this artist, look up to him. He's an amazing artist. He lived in an art gallery with a coyote. That was one of his art.
Oh.
But here's the coolest thing he ever did. He wrote a new chapter to Finnegan's Wake. I
Ooh.
mean, why didn't any of these other people do that? The big hotshot writers. I took an artist from Austria to go, I can do this. I've never read it though. I want to. But
Uh,
it goes along with this one, Zoe. Two of my film heroes, their mantra is ignore yourself. There's no self-expression. Cecil Taylor, jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. So is art making, writing, music, is it more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
um, I think it's kind of both because, like, our conception of ourselves doesn't exist without, the larger context and environment in which we exist. Our sense of self is formed, at least partially, probably all of it from that.
Yeah,
So it's like it's kind of both. We're like, yeah, we are expressing ourselves, but like, what is ourselves and what
yeah,
formed ourselves? Because no one formed a sense of self in complete isolation from everyone and everything.
yeah.
um yeah.
Can art making be egoless?
um it depends on how you define ego, because like, I don't know. um
Well, it's interesting because
yeah,
this 80% of people go, no, there's got to be ego about it. One woman said about a year ago, she goes, great art is egoless. And then another woman said after that, great art has to be egoless. So how do you reach that universality unless you're abandon ego? The problem again goes to the word ego, because once
yeah,
Freud brings up the word, people tend to think, oh, you mean egotistical. But
yeah.
but how do you reach that universality that everybody can relate to
Mhm.
with and imposing your, I mean, I know it is both. So tell me one major element of your writing, either fiction or not, both fiction and nonfiction, that stayed the same, and one major element that's changed in the years you've been writing.
Oh, that's a really good question. Hmm I'd say one thing. Hmm I'd say one thing that stayed the same is, and this is something that, like, sometimes it works and is good in the writing, and sometimes it's a flaw, is the tendency to, like, over explain, which can be a good thing, can be a bad thing, depending on what you're
Yeah,
doing. And often I'm able to harness it in a way that works and is fine. And this is true for both nonfiction, like for academic writing, and for fiction. It just comes out in a very different way, as you might imagine. Um, I think one thing that's changed. I think what has changed. Um, I'd say my writing has gotten less sort of it's less sort of stuck in its source, which makes no sense, I know. But especially when I'm writing fiction, but even with academic writing, you know, whatever source material I'm pulling from, especially if, I'm writing fiction and I'm pulling from, like a childhood memory or something. Um, I feel like, years ago, like the language would have a sort of deference to the feeling of that source material. Whereas now I feel like the language has a bit more power over it and is a bit less afraid of it. Like my language is a bit less afraid.
Oh, that's so good, because I'm caught up in that right now writing this book, and
Mhm.
less language is less afraid, because you want it to be free of that baggage. That's actually how Bloom again, um, absorb your influence and then abandon them. Like, good
Yeah.
luck. Like Joyce, how did he abandon Vico, Dante, Shakespeare, Bruno? How did he abandon him? He did. It's,
Well, I feel like for me, it's less abandoning and more it's digest your
oh, yeah,
influence. You have to chew and digest your influence. You can't just let it
digest.
sit in your
Yeah,
yeah.
that's good. Changing the words in my interviews is what it's all about. It's like we're psychoanalyzing the words, and like, what could I change that word to? Because that's also Zappa said it so well. He says, a genius is someone who steals from someone else and you can't tell who they stole it from.
Mm,
Because I
yeah.
mean, we knew Joyce was just a Tristram Shandy wannabe, when it came out. It's like, well,
Ah,
Okay, so Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says
okay.
it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness.
Mhm.
Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Oh, a weakness I turned into a strength. Um, That feels like a job interview question. Um, I work too hard. No.
Okay, no, if that
No.
is, if you work too hard, that's not a
No,
weakness.
that was a joke. I mean, sure, but yeah, that was a joke. A weakness I turned into a strength. Um, I'd say maybe like, hmm, that's a really I don't know. Um, I really I'm blanking out. I can't think of
Okay, don't
anything. I
worry.
mean,
So, Zoe, I'll just tell you what we do for Joyce. It's a good example.
uh-huh.
Wanted to be Ibsen, so he
Mhm.
couldn't be Ibsen, so he created almost a new form of theater. He
Yeah.
wanted to be a singer,
Mhm.
but he didn't succeed as a singer, so he turned musicality of lit he evokes the literature with musicality. And then the other one is his eyes are going, so he turns
Mhm.
the reading experience into an ear experience,
Mm.
flipping that. But anyways, that's fine. Here's another one. Um, Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
Um, ooh. I'd say when it's justified.
Yeah,
I was about to say, oh, when you've got control over it, but no, I don't. I think sometimes, yeah, but I think when it's justified, because then there's more you can do with it.
yeah.
That's good. Um, yeah. Yeah, and I could maybe tie that to the last question that I couldn't answer. I guess I've, in terms of my own justified anger that I've experienced, I've definitely, you know, uh, learned how to make that less of a weakness and more of a strength in terms of how I use it, how I handle it.
How you
Um,
channel it. Yeah.
yeah, and I've found, I mean, everyone's different, but I found for me, one of the best ways to do that is through humor.
Yeah.
If you can inject humor into the anger, then
Yeah.
you can make it work for you. Um,
Really good. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
ooh, it depends.
It definitely does.
Yeah, I'll have to compromise on that answer. So maybe compromise.
Well, when people say compromise, I go, there's no right or wrong answers, but that one you got right because 80% of people say conviction. And
Well, I think,
I personally think compromise is more important. But again, of course, it depends on the
mm,
context. There's
yeah,
so many. Yeah, but go ahead. Yeah.
but I think being able to compromise in a way that is actually compromise, not just, you like giving in to what other people want and letting people walk all over you, that kind of thing. I think being able to compromise effectively is a conviction. Because
Yeah,
you
of
choose
course.
you choose when you compromise and when you don't compromise. And if you're able to, only compromise when it's right to compromise, then you're sticking to your convictions. So they're kind of one and the same in a way.
It is
Um,
it's so much there. And in your accomplishments, how do you rate these three elements, luck, skill, and ambition? What's played the biggest role, second and third?
ooh, um, well, I mean, I feel like I have to put luck first because, like, at the end of the day, everything is up to chance. I had no say in being born into the time I was born in, the place I was, so it's like the luck of existing
Yeah.
in a certain way. But then I would say maybe ambition is second, um, and skill is last. But I
Yeah.
don't, yeah, but I think like ambition and skill inform each other because I feel like a lot of my ambition derived from realizing that I like had at least the potential for skill in something.
Yeah.
Um, and so they coexist together.
Yeah.
But then also I think, realizing that I had the potential for skill in something and knowing, how to engage with the feeling of ambition, that's also a product of luck.
Mm.
Um, so I could have been born into an environment where I was never encouraged to, work hard or anything like
Yeah.
that. So they're all sort of together in that way.
There's a great line, the more you practice, the luckier you get.
Yeah.
What's the most significant dis difference between men and women, physical aside?
Ooh. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say because, I think I think a lot of the differences that like we can, identify just in terms of like if they're identifiable like psychological differences, things like that. I personally don't know, and I don't think anyone can really truly know how much of those are just sort of manufactured by this sort of endless history of gender disparity
Yeah.
of that we've just never fully kicked the patriarchal mindset. So it's like I kind of that's something like I struggle with as a woman, where I'm kind of like, how much of my own self has just been manufactured by the fact that like I'm existing in a species that has historically always oppressed women.
Yeah.
It's a weird kind of thing where it's like, how much of this is, where do these differences come from? So like
Exactly.
yeah, that's so
It's
I
inherent.
struggle to answer that because I'm like, I don't,
But Zoe, it's been amazing because a lot of people go, or some people go, there is none. And I love to hear that. But we know physical side, there are here the typical is women are emotional and men are linear and they're logical. So that's but that's left and right brain, blah blah blah. But the follow-up
And I don't
question
even
is,
think that's true.
no, I know
Yeah.
it. I
Okay.
mean,
Good. Good. I thought you were
that's
saying.
why these cultural things come up, but this is the
Yeah.
follow-up question. What caused matriarchy? Or it should be matristic civilization.
Like what caused matriarchy?
Yeah.
I don't think it was ever caused. I,
But
I
when you say it's that women give birth, because they're the grounded force that causes the species to continue. So
yeah.
what caused matriarchy is biology. I don't
I
know. I mean, it's a question. People, again, it's like some of my question. People don't know how to handle them. I don't know how to handle it myself. It's just interesting. Actually, Peter Sellers, the great theater director, I says, what caused matriarchy? He says, a mother holding its baby.
mm,
And that's like, did we have some people go, there wasn't matriarchy, but if you study Maria Gimbutas, Riane Eisler, they'll tell you about the societies where there was no warfare and
mhm.
there women were the leaders, kind of. I mean, the word leader is like they were the home base, kind of.
Yeah.
So then there's this line, you create what you resist. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into you are what you hate. In fact, James Joyce said it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. Louis Buñuel said, thank God I'm an atheist. So it's like this line, you create what you resist. I'm not saying you, Zoe, but one
Mm.
creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that line?
Um, yeah, I think that's something I like to think about. We were talking about sort of when we were talking about, daydreaming and ranting before, and like the idea of like productivity needing to be
Yeah,
like the be all and all. I have this sort of constant sort of kind of dynamic going on, which I think is probably true for like anyone who is a scholarship in the arts, anything like that, where they're doing something that isn't like running a really profitable business, stocks, that kind of thing,
yeah,
where it's this you're doing something that exists outside of like what has been approved by sort of like the
the
capitalist Protestant work ethic kind of thing. But at the same time, because it's something you care about, you want to put hard work into it. So it's this kind of thing where like, I know that like, the culture on work that we have in the US and in Europe as well is, very detrimental in a lot of ways. But at the same time, in my own work, I sort of have to negotiate this, like, you know, I, I've been hardwired to think that way, but the work I'm doing, it's like I feel it's in opposition to that, but I need to engage in it. So it's this sort of like you can never sort of like in resisting the context in which you exist, you perpetuate it, you know.
totally.
Um,
That is my two favorite lines in that regard is Al Flipside. He goes, "Don't sell out, sneak in."
mm,
And then Schrader wrote Taxi Driver says the role of the artist is to attempt to sell out but fail. So it's
yeah.
like, oh, my art is so pure, I fail. It sounds romantic, but it's also like the typical parent question. Do you have something to fall back on? It's like, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
oh yeah, pursue the arts all you want, but you better get a job because you're probably not going to make much money or you're going to live. I asked this art student once, what do you aspire to be or do? And she goes, to go to New York and be a starving artist. I was like, you sound like a rich, spoiled kid, It's like, come on. I mean, but she romanticized that being,
Yeah.
an artist who's starving. And that it was sort of beautiful. She said it, but at the same time, it was ironic.
Yeah. No, it's this kind of thing like I feel like we as like human beings do have this like innate drive to work, whether that's work to
Yeah,
survive, through feeding
yeah,
ourselves and shelter and all that, or work through creating,
yeah,
art and things like that. And I think it's, we've taken that innate drive and like somehow turned it into something that's bad for us. So
yeah,
we still have that innate drive, and like work can be a positive, good thing.
yeah,
But then we've created a lot of mythos around it,
yeah,
to make it a toxic thing, and
yeah,
it's sort of navigating that. And I think no matter what you do, you're navigating that. But I think if you're doing something that is not in sort of the you know pre-approved list of things to do in the 21st century capitalist society,
yeah.
then it's becomes more difficult.
I
Um,
I I tell students, get your job and your life as mixed up as possible.
mm,
Because most people are like, "Don't take your job home with you." Like, go work for 8 hours, then go home. And then all the great artists I know are like security guards. They do airhead jobs so they don't
mm,
waste all their brain cells all day making their money to pay their rent. So then when they go home and do their art, they're like their mind's all ready to go. So, I mean, it varies. So, here's the next one. I asked my friend who wrote comedy with Robin Williams, can
mm.
satire be destructive? He says that's the job of satire. But if me or you do a cartoon in a certain country and they kill us, some people think dying is destructive. So Swift compared satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own. What's the function of satire?
Um, what is the function of satire? I think it serves a few different functions. I think I do kind of agree with that mirror statement. It's part of it is to serve as sort of a slap in the face to its audience of,
Yeah,
like, look at this thing that you can't see, like now you can see it because I've shown it to you in this way. But I think it's also functions as a relief for part of its audience as well,
yeah,
because along with being a wake up call, depending on what the subject of that satire is, um, there's inevitably going to be a section of the audience that, feels understood by the satire. Like example, since we were talking about gender before, if someone writes a satirical work on the patriarchy, inevitably, like the female end of that audience is going to feel seen and heard, and feel identify in a way that's very that's a relief,
yeah.
at least temporarily. um so it serves to both sort of trouble, but also like but also empower its audience, depending on who the audience is.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then what's the function of laughter?
um I think laughter is one of those, we were talking about the limits of expression before. Laughter is a way to express yourself without in a way that language cannot.
Yeah,
Um, like when you're talking about, I think it was Andy Warhol wanting to just make noises about the
yeah,
painting. It's kind
yeah,
of that.
yeah,
Um, you know, so I've heard that like laughter, like psychologically, is it's almost like a fear response to something we don't understand,
wow.
which I guess tracks with the, expressing something that we can't put in words.
That's really good. I'm gonna look into that one. That's really important because, Gurdjieff said that laughter is the reconciliation of yes and no. And
Hmm.
here's one, McLuhan loved to quote Steve Allen. He says, "Behind every joke, there's a grievance." Well, we could drop the word every. Behind jokes, there's grievances. Any thoughts on that line?
Uh, yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah,
Because I think jokes are their relief from the inner turmoil. Like
yeah,
I was saying before that, like, I found the way to deal with justified anger is to infuse humor into it. And I think that, ties into that like that's how we deal with the difficulties of living, is to make it funny.
It's really been fun, Zoe. I got a few more and we're out of here. Thank you so much for your time. So these are 5 quick Alan Watts questions off the top of your head in just a couple words. 1, who started it all?
Whatever fish crawled out of the ocean.
There you go. I've
Onto
never.
land?
Okay. Number 2, are we going to make it?
Probably
3, where do we put it?
somewhere else.
4, who's cleaning it up?
All of us?
5, is it serious?
No.
All right. That's like Frank Zappa says, I'm very serious about being not serious. Zoe, how do you find peace of mind?
How do I find peace of mind? Various things. Like, are you talking about habits or just like how I think about things?
However, whatever context you want to put it in. Yeah.
Oh, um, I guess I find peace of mind in multiple ways, but I think one of them is in building a relationship with myself.
Yeah.
Which I think is increasingly difficult to do in the modern world, and
Yeah.
that's yeah.
Really?
Yeah, because can I rant for a minute
Of
on this
course,
topic?
you can run all you want.
Okay. Yeah, because I was thinking about this the other day because there's been a lot of stuff sort of in the news and in media about like the loneliness epidemic, that kind of thing. And I was reading stuff about it and people are saying, oh, it's because, a lot of it is self-imposed. People are choosing to, stay home and just watch Netflix, TikTok,
Yeah.
whatever, and instead of, going out into the world and experiencing things and seeing people. And and a lot of what I read was like, oh, you shouldn't isolate, you shouldn't be by yourself, like, we need community, all that. And I was thinking about it and I'm like, I think it depends. And I think it depends in an important way, because I think, yes, we do need community and other people, but I also think people need to spend time by themselves. But I think the way that we are told to spend time by ourselves is not the correct way, because we've been in 2024, a lot of our spending time by ourselves is in front of a screen. It's searching for some sort of stimulation, that it demands little effort. And I think that's where the issue lies, rather than people like isolating. It's more that like when they are spending time alone, they're not connecting with themselves in any way. And I try to, as much as I'm not one to talk in terms of doom scrolling on social media. I do plenty of that too. But like in my time alone, obviously reading is, I think, a great way to cultivate a relationship with yourself, because yes, it's media, but you're actively involved. But I think also, like, one thing I do is I try to go for like very, very long, like walks, things like that. I try to do things where like, my brain isn't fully occupied with some sort of media. And that's how I build a relationship with myself.
A long walk and reading is so good because it's so hard to do. Because when YouTube started, I told all my friends, look at this. And then for 10 years, I would not do YouTube. I didn't do it. And now I am just like, dig, 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 dig. And it's like, Jerry, stop. And it's like, I am so, and you think just what you said, you're spending time with other people. Nope, you're not. You need to spend time with yourself. That was really well put. Good rant. So if you walked on the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Well, at first I would maybe critique some of her fashion choices.
That's good.
But then I would just tell her that it's not going to be like this forever, which is like such a cliche thing. But I think I would clarify that there would be difficult things forever, but the difficult things would change, and she would get better at handling them. And that a lot of the difficult things now if there are things that do matter, which there were things that did matter, they will improve. And then the
Yeah.
things that don't matter,
Yeah.
they don't matter, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know.
Good. One of my favorites, you'll love this, Zoe, because it's about self.
Mhm.
This woman, amazing woman, I asked her, you were walking down the street, you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say? She goes, I love you. I was like,
Mm.
it made me cry. I mean, people say, you know, they say what you say, you know, it'll get better, and they kind of want to advise their self, you know, it's going
Yeah.
to be okay, blah, blah, blah. Amazing. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Oh, over. I get so offended when someone puts it under. I'm like, what? Like it's so it's not intuitive. It scares me that people do
Well,
that.
the patent has it going over, but
Yeah.
5% at most, 95% of people say over, but the 5% who say under have their reasons.
I think they should be studied. I think they should be studied. It's concerning.
If a publisher was going to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Oh,
Okay, well, I'll be
just walking around.
Oh,
Um,
nice. They want to scent the glue and the binding. What smell?
oh, um, that's a really good question. Probably the smell of fresh bagels, you know.
Oh, fresh bagels. Oh my
Yeah,
God, I love that
it's a
smell.
subtle scent, but yeah.
I love bagels. Bagels and cream cheese, my way of life. Okay, if a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed, and what would it be made of?
Oh, um, where would I want it displayed? Um, ooh, in the middle of Sweeney's. No,
Yeah, sweet. That's
no,
sweet.
no.
No,
Oh, maybe. Um,
no. Now, what would it be made of?
um, you know, those butter statues are really funny.
All right, that's good.
I think that would be like a great week in Sweeney's where they've just got a butter statue of me.
Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Something good I've never had and I never want.
Yeah.
Um, but good is relative. Um, hmm. All the answers.
Oh my God, I never had that. All the man, you're anticipating. You got ESP. You got to. Here's my next question. What's a question that remains unresolved for you?
um, hmm. It's a question that remains unresolved. Why am I so resistant to things I would not think I would be resistant to?
Oh, that is good. That is so that's manip. Have you studied Manipian satire?
Have I studied what?
Manipian satire.
No, but maybe
Oh,
perhaps I should.
you've got to dive into it because it's
Okay.
totally what the wake is. It's Manipian
Oh,
satire. So it's using the medium that you're satirizing. And I mean, your generation, you grew up. I mean, that's what the Simpsons and
mm,
South Park, all they're making fun of themselves in the medium of that they're working in.
yeah.
So really, Alice in Wonderland invented it, Rabelais, Finnegan's Wake. And Manipian satire is really heavy, but it's almost like, you know, the form and the content are so that's sort of what you said. Why am I so resistant to the things I'm resistant? That was really good. Okay, what's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
That inspires me. Um, Oof. Um, I perhaps a bit political, but I think I'm seeing larger and larger pushback to AI every day, which
Yeah.
that inspires me because
Okay.
it feels like the beginning of the end of us just accepting whatever these big tech billionaires want to like push onto us
Yeah.
without us asking for it.
Yeah.
You know, so
How has writing shaped your behavior?
um my behavior. I think it's made me reflect on the ways in which living feels like performing.
Yeah.
Because I've found that when I'm writing, one thing I need to get over, especially with fiction, also with academic writing, but more so with fiction, is the feeling of the reader looking over your shoulder as you write, and that that stops the writing. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's made me reflect on how much of my living is performing, and how much of it is actually living.
Yeah. Really, Zoe, check out the origins of performance art as an art form. It's
Mhm.
Jack Smith. Watch
Uh-huh.
the Jack Smith documentary
Okay.
and Alan Caprow.
Uh-huh.
They kind of invented performance art, and it's so huge. What is the wake but a form of performance art? And there's
Yeah.
that's what it is because each person's reading it. Like I read, if you caught me at Sweeney's the other day, there was a word in it. It said like Norfolk, and I said Netflix, and I just I put it in there to just see, hey, why'd you change the word to see if anyone was paying attention? No, no one said anything. The other
Mm.
thing about performance, just saying that word is, McLuhan goes to Cambridge and
Uh-huh.
learns about Finnegan's Wake from the New Criticism people. You know the New
Mhm.
Criticism movement?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So that's where he got this big thing on Finnegan's Wake and changed everything. And then he sort of went into Adorno, all the
Mhm.
French, the Derrida, Echo. They all went sort of out of McLuhan finding the Wake. And my friend, and then McLuhan converted to the Catholicism.
Mm.
And my friend says, Marshall converted to Catholicism as a performance art piece. It sort of like sounds like something Joyce did. Joyce did this as a performance art piece. Okay, two more and we're out of here. Thank you so much, Zoe. This is Thornton Wilder in
Mhm.
1928, one of the greatest Wakians ever. You ever see that book that's like this thick of all his letters he wrote to people about Finnegan's Wake?
No,
Oh,
actually.
check it out. It's heavy. And
Okay.
he wrote Our Town, but
Oh,
Skin
yeah.
him, Skin him the Teeth, that play is total Wakian
Oh, yeah.
to the point where Campbell went, he ripped off the Wake. He says, he probably goes, "Hey, thanks for the compliment." Okay, here's Thornton Wilder. Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time.
Mm.
Laid your cards on the table for over 3 hours. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
Oh, what is it all about? I I'm kind of gonna steal from the quote you just quoted, about making art, the both revealing and concealing. And
Yeah,
I think it's all about that striking that balance in
yeah,
life,
yeah,
engaging with the world, but also engaging with yourself and having that balance.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, thanks for being such a great listener. Most people think the quote's quote, but they don't reference it because I used to say, tell me a secret, and I thought, yeah, you can't tell me a secret. So I flipped it. What's it all about? And then people like, what is it? What is it all about? I mean, they make fun of it, but that is an amazing thing
Yeah.
that Wilder said, because you put the concealing as the inner, the self. What is inside me, my
Mhm.
brain, or my thoughts, or my heart, and then what's outside me, and how do you balance them?
Yeah.
What gives you the most optimism?
Um, I think when you sort of reach that moment in doing something, whether that is, reading, making art, working, even, spending time with other people, out on a walk, where you just have this like moment of like almost a runner's high, where you just really sort of lock into what you're doing and you
Yeah,
feel very on top of it.
yeah,
Those are the moments in which I feel most optimistic.
yeah. I missed the word. What kind of high? It sounded like you said hunter's high.
Runner's high.
Oh, runner's high. Yeah,
Yeah.
runner's
Like, I'm
high.
not a
Like,
runner myself, so I
right,
can't
right. But
attest to
you
it.
get that endorphin rush. It's
Yeah,
almost like yeah. Runner's high is a good way
yeah.
to put
I
that.
I I would describe it as to use current Gen
Yeah,
Z slang, locking in, when I'm
locking
like
in.
when I lock into something and it's going really well, then,
Yeah. It's like the flow, they call it the flow
yeah,
sometimes, but
like a
locking
flow
in.
state
I
kind of
love
thing, yeah.
runners high is really good. So, the first question I asked you in part one was, what's the best thing for a human being?
Mhm.
Well, Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being. The last question I asked you is, what gives you the most optimism? That's what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. He said, other people. So it's
Mm.
fun spending this time with another person, especially because of you, Zoe. Thank you so much. I learned so much with you, and I hope we can do these more often, because you are you are really smart. What I like is you're articulate and concise, and I really
Thank you.
learned. Thank you so much, Zoe.
Well, yeah, thank you for having me on. This has been so much fun.
Yeah. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope it never ends and we can
Yeah.
keep talking forever and ever. And I'll see you Tuesday. Hopefully. Okay. Bye, Zoe. Thank you.
Bye.